And here we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today we have another meetup, another great guest. Today we have Overeem and Christiaan, Verwijs, the authors of an awesome book, the Zombie Scrum, and also guys developed the PSM2 class, which is an awesome class. A lot of liberating structures, a lot of knowledge, a lot of fun and valuable stuff over there. And we are very, very happy to have them here today.
And also poster where Scrum is on one picture. I'm using it on my trainings for last 5 years, I believe.
Yeah, it's also true. It's also true. You might also check the latest white paper, which was changed, the 6 stances of a Scrum Master. Yeah. There was an interesting update over there as well. So you might check.
Yeah, this South Park stances, absolutely. They're very popular in region, so I'm like highlighting. So people can recognize the heroes, you know. Sorry.
And you might also visit the liberates.com, the company that Barry and Christiaan run. It's an awesome company, a lot of great content, and subscribe to guys. So even before I became a PST, Barry and Christiaan were one of the people that I was following constantly and reading, and I was getting a lot of valuable information and still getting. So highly recommend personally. Yep, and we are very happy to have them here today. So traditionally, we're going to start.
Say from me, listen, I was headhunting them for a few years, trying to invite to Kyiv for Simplicity Day conference, but every time I'm coming too late, and their calendar is fully booked for years, I believe, guys. So at least this occasion, we can finally take you and put on the scene.
You have to book guys in advance, you know.
Yeah, well, usually it works like that.
So, Artem, I see that everybody who is currently on the call has already been to our meetups.
Yeah,
honestly. Like you guys know everything about our initiative. So maybe we won't make the PowerPoint presentation. We're just going to remind that we will be gathering donations for Ukraine. Yeah, all of the links will be in the chat. And maybe let's tune in for some awesome content from Barry and Christiaan. Yep.
Maybe.
Okay.
No new people.
Cool. Yeah.
How could it be?
Okay.
I have no idea.
But it's reason you're doing something good that people are coming back to with other sessions as well. So that's great to see. Yeah. So Chris, shall I just kick it off and get started?
Yeah, sure. Can I say one thing before we start, before we dive into Scrum? Because I already mentioned it when people were coming in, but in a way, it feels kind of weird to talk about Scrum when something so super serious and sad is going on in Ukraine. But at the same time, we're all trying to do whatever we can to help. So we're going to be talking about Scrum, but I just want to emphasize just how horrible that is, and donate as much as you can to the people in Ukraine to help wherever we can. That's just what I wanted to say before we dive into Scrum.
Yep, fully agree. +1 to that, Chris.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Take it away.
So I'm just gonna share my screen. There, you should be looking at my screen right now. So let's go to this one. The purpose of the session. Well, my purpose, and I hope Chris, we didn't really discuss it in tremendous detail up front. So let's see if Chris and I have the same purpose. But my purpose is in a way to make it an interactive session. So this is not going to be Chris and I talking for 60 or 75 minutes. If you are following us for a while, then that's something that you might already have expected. So we've got a couple of breakout room moments scheduled, nothing scary. It's more to also to help your own thinking get started, but just so you know. And what I mostly have in mind is just to have a joint exploration about the difference between effective Scrum teams and ineffective Scrum teams together to see, so what's the difference? What can you do as a Scrum team yourself? What can you do as a member of a team? But also what should be in place around the Scrum teams in the environment of the teams itself. I don't want to make it too abstract, so I always try to make it more specific and also to help you with some personal reflection. So what is something that you immediately after this meetup or maybe tomorrow can do to start improving in your own Scrum team or in your own organization? Chris, anything to add?
No, perfect. This is exactly my purpose too. So I'm glad we're
nice.
aligned. Yeah.
Excellent. So we're going to start actually with the first interactive moment already. And I'm going to ask you to take 1 or 2 minutes of individual reflection, individual thinking. And the question for you to think about is, what is the opposite of an effective Scrum team? What is something that you would see, hear, or notice? So without having explained anything about what we even mean with an effective Scrum team, that's something that we'll do later on. The question for you already is, given your own knowledge that you have about Scrum, about Scrum team effectiveness, what do you consider the opposite of an effective Scrum team? And if you would be part of that team, what is something that you would see, hear, or notice? So just take 1 or 2 minutes to get your own thinking started. Maybe grab a piece of paper and do some writing for your own. And I'll actually stop sharing my screen because then I can prepare the breakout rooms a bit more easy. If you joined a bit later, then no worries. I'll put the link to the Google presentation in the chat so that you can also open it on your own device. Artem and Andrei, can I consider you guys just, let's say, regular participants and that you also join breakout rooms?
With pleasure.
With pleasure.
Yep.
Just join me. Make me join one as well, Barry.
And I'm going to join as well, so we're just going to all join in a bit.
Okay.
That was the reason to organize all this stuff, you know.
Nice. So we're going to do 8 minutes in a breakout room.
3 workshops.
Okay, I'm going to do small groups of 3 participants. 8 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to give you roughly 1 minute to get your own thinking started. Okay, in a moment, I'll open a breakout room. I've done small groups, so groups of 3. In slide 4, 5, and 6, you can add your thoughts, so things that you discussed with your groups and that you would like to remember. Just pick one of these slides and just write it down over there. Also, just if you don't know each other yet, take some time to introduce yourself. I would say keep it short, so don't make it a 7-minute explanation about who you are, because then, well, the time box is already over. So I'm going to open the breakout rooms right now. See you back in 8 minutes.
Enjoy. Interrupted.
Yeah, those time blocks, you know.
Yeah.
Zoom is the Chuck Norris of time boxing, right?
And somehow time goes faster online. It's very interesting. I also joined a breakout room, and in my breakout room, I think we already covered most of the examples that Chris and I often gave. Chris, we've got 2 illustrations by which we can explain in our own words Scrum team ineffectiveness, or the opposite as well. Shall I take the initiative to explain the first one and then give it to you?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So we're doing also whispering out loud online. If you have multiple facilitators, that works quite well.
Yeah, because you changed the slides. This is new, so I like it.
Yeah, I changed it. Well, I included an illustration from our book, the Zombie Scrum Survival Guide, and in that book, which we, by the way, wrote with 3 authors, also Johannes Schartau, our friend from Germany. And this is one of the illustrations that, in a way, captures some elements of ineffective Scrum teams as well. What you can see or what you cannot see is that there isn't a sprint goal. So an ineffective Scrum team is in a way clueless about the direction they're heading. They don't have a product goal. They don't have a sprint goal at all. Or if they have a sprint goal, then probably the goal is each time the same, just finish the items on the sprint backlog, and that's it. They don't have anything in the done column, and probably that's also not going to happen in that sprint. So they don't have any working software at the end of the sprint, because they don't have any working software or any working products at the end of the sprint. Stakeholders are also nowhere to be found, because who cares about the team, what they are doing? There's nothing to validate. There's no value that the team is delivering. And chances are, if they would have invited stakeholders, you could argue or wonder, like, are those really the stakeholders, people with an actual stake in the product, or is it just audience that makes a lot of noise but doesn't really add any value? The retrospective is a long time ago, so there's no continuous improvement going on. They did send people to a Scrum training, but given the spider web, they're not really actively using the things that they learned in training. And there's not really a lot of collaboration going on between the developers. One person turned into a zombie, and other people seem to find it quite normal, or they haven't noticed it yet. So these are just some examples of ineffective Scrum teams. Chris, have I forgotten examples? Probably, but do you have anything to add? Or things that you've heard
in our room, we had a lot of good examples. I see that in all the rooms there were a lot of good examples. So it's very easy for us to come up with signs of ineffective Scrum teams, because probably we've seen quite a lot of ineffective Scrum teams. But one thing that I was curious about, Barry, it's a question to you, is architects, are they stakeholders? What do you think?
That's a good one.
Because there wasn't.
I want to say it's a tricky one, because in my own experience, I've always had a lot of, well, let's say, arguments with architects in organizations, like should they be part of a Scrum team or not? There was always this debate going on. Yeah, I think if purely based on my own experience, I always like to see that architects are just part of a team as well. So they're not separate. Like it might even be like maybe also a symptom if they are not part of a team and considered a stakeholder.
The reason I ask this one is because we talked for a long time about stakeholders like architects discussing with each other and not being able to make a decision, which means that the team can't move forward because everything has to be approved. And I've seen that happen a lot as well. So that was just one thing that I thought was really cool. Generally speaking, what we also don't see in ineffective Scrum teams is a sense of autonomy. So teams are like, they have no control. And this is an example of a lack of autonomy, because apparently they need to ask some other team to do it. In our group, we also had an example of a separate QA team. All these dependencies make it hard for teams to make their own decisions. And if they don't feel autonomy, they're not going to own the process, and they're not going to own any of the improvements that they're making. So the whole Scrum framework collapses in on itself. It may look like Scrum, but it's not Scrum at all.
So what do we actually mean with effectiveness? Was that the intention of this slide, Chris?
Yeah, because it sounds very easy to talk about what's an effective Scrum team. And I think we all have ideas about this, as we already explored in the breakout rooms. But what actually does it mean to say a Scrum team is effective? So as sort of a working definition, that's helpful, I think, for this session, but also in general, if you work with Scrum teams. For me and for Barry and for the research that we're doing, we consider a Scrum team effective when the stakeholders are satisfied. And by stakeholders, I mean actual stakeholders, so users and customers of the product, and not the person from the marketing department that has an opinion about the product. That person is still important, but not necessarily a stakeholder. So their satisfaction is important of the stakeholders, but also that the team is satisfied with the process by which those outcomes are actually delivered to stakeholders. So in a sense, the team is also a stakeholder, but for their own process. So effective Scrum teams have happy stakeholders, happy team members. That's the short summary of this.
And we've got a couple of steps left in this workshop, actually. One of them, and that's something that we're going to do in a moment, is focused on your own exploration in a small group about, so what other factors do you contribute to an effective Scrum team? After that, we're gonna have a look at more like the environment of Scrum teams. And the final step in this session is more going to be, so what can you personally do to start improving? So we're going to focus on this one. I'm just going to I see there's one chat message, if it's a message for us.
No, but that's Rishi. He had to drop out for his daily scrum and he'll be back after the daily scrum. I mean, how cool is that? That's flexibility, right?
That's commitment to the team. That's excellent.
Yeah.
So let's take 1 or 2 minutes for some individual thinking about this question. What factors contribute to how effective a Scrum team can be? And in which areas are they different from ineffective Scrum teams? So in a way, you could say, well, that's the opposite of what we discussed in the first round, but I'm pretty sure that maybe you'll also stumble upon any new things. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen again so that I can set up the breakout room. So I'm going to do new breakout rooms. So ideally, you've spoken to everyone at the end of this video.
That's nice. Cool. In the meantime, we can already get our thinking started about the question, about the factors that contribute to how effective Scrum teams can be. David, can you summarize your point in slide 12, Brad? Because then we have captured it at least.
Oh, nice. So welcome back again. Chris, do you want to take the initiative this time to maybe explain slide 13, or is there something else that you want to draw attention to?
Yeah, can you at least share it?
That's the minimum I can do, yeah. There.
So before we hop into that one, Barry, I was curious if there were factors that were very surprising to all the participants, because we've all been in breakout rooms. Was there a factor that you heard that was super surprising or something you hadn't thought of before? This is just an open question. So if you have some thoughts on this, just unmute yourself and give the example.
Okay, then I can share. There was a provocative question from Barry about what the links between complexity of environment, product development teams, and effectiveness. And there is a good point that effective Scrum teams will start validating the most risky assumptions as soon as possible, not like saying that let's wait for a while, let's do what we know how to do, and then we will be capable to do it. We will know more about the system. So yeah, they start to validate as early as possible.
Right, that's nice. So basically, in this case, teams are getting nervous when there are very risky, uncertain things on their product backlog, and they want to do it as quickly as possible. Right, that's good. That's a good example. That is a surprising one. Yeah.
It's maybe not a surprising one, but it's a very important one. And to make it happen, you need to create a safe environment so they can do this validation without like worried about the future of their career.
I can imagine it's surprising for teams getting into Scrum because this is completely different from what they're used to, right? So it may be a completely different way of thinking. That's nice. Any other examples? Maybe 1 or 2 more before we dive into the discussion.
There was a good example from Andrew about the ability to celebrate small victories, which is, I think, it's not so surprising, but it's very often missed and then forget within the team. Just we're only focused on the things that just do things and that's all.
Right.
Instead of collaborate.
What is the most recent celebration that you've done with your team? Do you have an example? If you have an example.
I will have to think a little bit longer about that. That's the thing I forgot about.
Oh, that's okay. But you can always enter it in the chat later if something comes to mind. But Barry and I are a team and we don't celebrate as often as we should. So it's very hard to celebrate the small things, like the small successes. But that's a good example. Yeah. I have one in our group.
What you meant over there is Scrum is actually built that way. You have a sprint goal.
Yeah.
You accomplish the sprint goal, you have something to celebrate about, and we don't do that quite often. And some time ago, I just caught myself on the thought that, look, I promote that stuff, but I don't do that stuff myself. No?
That's a good point.
Yeah, we're guilty of that too. Absolutely. Yeah, but that's important. Scrum is really a good way to celebrate successes because there are many opportunities. So before we dive into the discussion of the model, one that was discussed in our room, which I really liked, was not surprising, but important in that you always make sure teams understand why they're doing things that are part of Scrum. It's not because the Scrum guide tells you that there should be a product owner. You have to explain why it's important that there is a product owner. There's someone who can make decisions, because otherwise they're not made and the team will suffer. So that was a really good one. Now, what we've done, and that's what you're seeing in this slide, is Barry and I had the opportunity a few years ago, basically before Corona hit, to start a sort of hobby project to start collecting data from real Scrum teams. And of course, Barry and I have experience with a lot of Scrum teams, but we don't have access to 2,000 Scrum teams. Well, we do now, because we have data from that many. We have a lot more at this moment, but the picture that you're seeing in a moment is based on 2,000 teams. And what the question was that we tried to answer is, what are actually the factors that seem to be important across Scrum teams wherever they are on the world? And the nice thing is that in those 2,000 teams, we actually have Scrum teams from all over the world. We have Scrum teams from different sizes of organizations, different team sizes, different kinds of products that they're working on. So if we look at the factors, what is important? Now, 5 things are like the core factors. Those are the circles in the center of the model. All these factors contribute to team effectiveness. That's a blue circle at the right hand, right? That's happy stakeholders, happy team members. Now, the first thing that's important, and this is not at all surprising, but it's very clear from the data, if teams are involved with their stakeholders, if they know why their stakeholders what their stakeholders want, what their stakeholders need. If stakeholder concern is high in a team, they will be more effective. We can actually tell this from the data that we see. In turn, what's also important is that that's not the only thing, because it's very easy for a Scrum team to get a sense of what their stakeholders want, but they actually have to be able to deliver increments, deliver software, deliver features to actually satisfy those needs. And that's why responsiveness is important, which is the circle below. I don't think you can see my cursor, so I'm pointing at things here, but that's just for myself, I think. So responsiveness is the second factor. Now, those are 2 things that are typical for Scrum teams, but there are also 2 core factors that are super important before that. The first one is there should be a climate of continuous improvement in a team. And that means that within the team, it should feel safe for people to suggest new ways of doing things. It should be possible for teams to make time to learn something new, to run experiments. Teams should also develop the skills to navigate conflicts, which is something that I also heard in some of the breakout rooms, that conflict navigation is important. And if that climate of continuous improvement is there, teams will be more effective. And team autonomy is something we also mentioned, is also important. So teams should feel like they have control of their process. And this means they can make decisions about how to do their work, in what order to do their work, but it's also important that they are cross-functional, that not everyone in the team can do everything, but that the members of the team have a good understanding of who knows what in a team, and that they know how to put those skills together to effectively satisfy the needs of their stakeholders. So continuous improvement, team autonomy, stakeholder concern, responsiveness. Those are team factors, but there's also another one, which is management support. And what we can clearly see in the data is that teams that have more support for management, where management understands why teams are working with Scrum, are more effective than teams that do not have that support, or at least don't feel that they have that support. So this is clear from the data, and that's interesting because it gives us more arguments to convince the organization around Scrum teams to find better ways to support them and become more effective over time. Now, Barry, is there something that you would like to add to this model? Because it's pretty big and we're going to talk about it some more, of course.
I'm just gonna stop sharing. Well, it already happened. No, maybe just that what you're looking at right now is a poster, and you can download. I think I included the link. Otherwise, you can share it afterwards in the chat. You can download this poster from our web shop for free. And in a way, it contains the essence of what Christiaan has just shared, like these 5 key findings as well. It also, what Chris has done together with Daniel Russo, who's a professor at the Copenhagen University, is that they wrote an academic paper that contains way more detail about well, the background of this model and the findings. And mostly for people like me who find it very difficult to read those types of paper, Chris wrote also a blog post using normal language that explains this model as well. I'm not entirely sure, just stop sharing for a moment if I included those links, but otherwise we share them afterwards.
Yeah, I shared the link just now, Barry, the non-technical version.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, so there's actually also a third version coming up of that research paper, because we're in the final round of the peer review, which is a whole thing that happens with academic research. But that means that it's probably going to be the final one with more updates compared to the previous one. But that's coming up hopefully in 2 weeks.
Cool. So I think we're going to do one more round in breakout rooms. I think, Chris, that we can do the final step also just in the main channel.
Can I say one more thing before we move on? Because
sure.
I think that that's really important for people to take away. The model that we just shared is not an opinion. It's based on actual data, which means that, I'm a Scrum Master, I'm a Scrum trainer, I'm a fan of Scrum. I'm inclined to see proof wherever I look that Scrum works, or what parts of Scrum make it work. But the reason why Barry and I are collecting all this scientific data and doing this research is because we want to make it easier to have actual evidence-based discussions about this, so that you can create change in your team and in your organization. If you invest in the factors that I just mentioned in the model, based on the data that we have, we can explain between 60 and 80% of the effectiveness of Scrum teams based on those factors alone. So if you are able to build more concern for stakeholders, more autonomy, a higher climate for continuous improvement, more management support, and make your team more responsive, they will become more effective, period. Their stakeholders will be happier and the team members will also be happier. And I think that that's super helpful because it gives us direction on what to focus on, but also what not to do, right? The factors that are not in this model are still important probably, but maybe start with these. So that's the contribution that we hope this research makes to our Agile community. And having said that, I think it's okay to move on here.
I think that's good. That's good news, right?
I hope so. Yeah. And we're still collecting more data, so there's always more insights coming on.
Cool. So let's move on to this question. Again, you know the pattern by now. Let's just take some time, 1-2 minutes for some individual reflection. And the question is more focused on organizational level. So what must be in place in organizations to support Scrum teams to become more effective? So what must be in place in organizations to support Scrum teams to become more effective? And try to make it very tangible and specific. What is something that you've seen in organizations? What is something that you really noticed in organizations that had effective Scrum teams? Maybe you can also flip it, like what is it that you saw happening in organizations that resulted in highly ineffective Scrum teams? Could also be very interesting to know that. Just take 1 or 2 minutes to get your thinking started about this question, and then I'll set up the breakout rooms once more. Welcome back, everyone. So for the past 8 minutes in your group, you had a conversation about, so what must be in place in organizations to support Scrum teams to become more effective? So what are some of the things that you discussed? What are some of the things that stood out in a conversation that you've had? Let's just take some time to debrief it together.
I can share a personal example from my life. What isn't that common that I see in practice, but it actually stood out and was quite an awesome thing. So before actually using Scrum, the organization set up goals which we would like to achieve with Scrum, and goals on level like we have to shorten the time to market. we have to increase the value of our products, like our ROI of our products. We have to increase the quality of our products. And those goals were implemented on the strategic level. And this was a hierarchical organization, and it was needed to do that so people would treat Scrum seriously. And it opened up a room for removing impediments, but also to providing change for the organization. So people didn't have to, think, is it for real? Do we really need to change? No, it was on the goal level. And it made the role of Scrum Master, the accountability of Scrum Masters so easier with explaining why on the organizational level. And it's not a common thing that I see in the organization, but it was a pure awesome thing. And in that context, it worked very well.
That's a good one.
So it's also about creating urgency, right? With the goals, you're creating a sense of urgency, like we have to change, and then people have a reason for changing. That's great.
And what else? I think something oh yeah, go ahead, Martin.
What we were also discussing, that it's quite important to create an environment in organization for sustainability of these teams. Because if people are quite often changing, like especially if you have some resource management and say like we need 2 senior developers, we'll put them in different department and stuff like that. Even for one team, it will be affecting them a lot. And if we have large scale with several teams working on one product, it will be like a nightmare for creating like effective delivery.
But in a way, this relates to team autonomy as well, right? That the team is not surprised, like, hey, next week you've got 2 new developers and they don't know anything about it.
Yeah. Or you will have two less developers, like they live in us, unfortunately.
It also
startup.
It also comes up with letting the team decide who should be on the team, right? Yeah. And I always love the term resource management.
Yeah, especially human resource management, right? Yeah. Humans are resources. Yeah.
Something we discussed in our room, and I'm not sure, Aliona, if you want to share that one. Is more like, I'm going to translate it as superficial change, like only changing the tags of roles and maybe the language being used in organizations. Do you want to elaborate on that one?
Yeah, I can repeat the same example that I had. Isn't like in one of the organizations that I've worked in, we were basically at some point within the organizations, we have been basically implementing the fixed price, fixed scope projects, right? But since we were an agile organization and modern and stuff, we were not allowed to call them projects. Instead, we were calling them initiatives, right? Because changing the name makes it all better. Things like that, and I think Barry had a similar example.
So we can, I think, so what must be in place in organizations to support Scrum teams become more effective is like meaningful change and meaningful support. Like not just changing the labels and things like that, while in reality, things are just going the same as that they always went. And another example that we discussed in our room is that what must be in place in organizations to get to effective Scrum teams is that leadership, management, anyone that is supporting the teams actually helps the teams with removing impediments. Because nothing is so frustrating for a Scrum team or multiple Scrum teams if continuously the same problems are raised that are beyond the skills of the teams themselves to resolve, and continuously it's ignored. Or maybe it's acknowledged, like, yeah, that's really a problem, but it's somehow nobody helps and supports the teams to resolve those impediments. And that's really frustrating, because at that point, teams are more like, this is super demotivating. Let's just stop raising this issue. It's never going to be resolved in this organization. And from that point, it's just going downhill often with those teams.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
And what else?
I also, although we didn't discuss in the meeting room, I also think that maybe, and this might be also categorized as an impediment. Changing somehow infrastructure, because in an organization I've worked with, you know, there were those dependencies I was talking about. There were some dependencies cross teams, and also the team were having different goals, and one team was not able to reach its goal because of the dependency that it has by the other team that had a completely different goal. You know, and this was, I don't know, there were not enough test environments. There were, and this was an impediment that the team had, and nobody did anything. So maybe, you know, we should invest somehow also in the technology in order to be able to have effectiveness in Scrum teams.
That's a very good example. Yeah. And maybe a very simple one that just came to mind is, it's something that Chris and I notice actually quite often, is that if you take a look at the model, something that should be in place is the willingness of an organization to create transparency about what's going on in the organization. So what we hear quite often is, well, it's not going that good in our organization. So right now is not a good moment to make visible what's going on, given all those factors that you visualize. First, let's improve stuff, and then we might start creating transparency about all these factors. So I think a very first step might also be just the willingness to create transparency about all, well, basically about the state of Scrum in an organization is already a very good first step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we are aware how that sounds really easy, but it's not. Because it's never easy in real life, but that's also why Barry and I are doing the research. But we also created a tool called the Scrum Team Survey that you can use for free with your team to actually diagnose how your team is doing on the factors in the model that we just shared. And you can do that with multiple teams, and then you can put those results together, bring your stakeholders in, bring management in, make sense of the results and the patterns that you're seeing in the data. Maybe all the teams are struggling with low autonomy, for example, or lack of management support, and then start investing in those areas specifically. And because it's part of the model, if you improve in those areas, you will become more effective. So that's a way for us in which we're trying to help you in making that change as well. There's a lot of feedback that you also get in that tool that's available for free, like workshops to do with your team and so on. So just give it a look if you want. We think it's pretty cool.
So we've got one more step in mind, but before I'm going to explain that one, is there something that someone would like to have clarified or share before we go to the final step of this session? Okay, that was 5 seconds. I often use the 8 seconds rule of silence, and then someone starts speaking, so it's interesting. But it was still 5 seconds. So I'm just going to share my screen again. This is the question for you to think about. I don't think I'm going to do, Chris, what shall we do? Shall we again do breakout rooms, or shall we just do 2 minutes and then discuss it in the main channel?
Yeah, I like that.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
So we're just going to stay in the main channel, but I will give you about 1 or 2 minutes for some individual thinking. And maybe also, if you like, share your answer in slides 20, 21, 23. So the questions are, what opportunities do you see to use Scrum more effectively in your team or your organization? What is something that you can do without permission from others or resources you don't have access to? And with resources, we don't mean people, to be very clear. So get your own. So if you have an improvement in mind to make your team or your organization more effective with Scrum, this is an excellent moment to share it. And ideally, it's just a small step in the right direction. something that you can maybe do, it's Wednesday, so something that you can start doing on Thursday, for example. And
actually have stakeholders in an organization join the reviews.
Yeah, that's a good one. So what's going to be your very first step? Because I like it, it's a good direction, but what are you going to do tomorrow, Sergey?
Be getting in touch or identifying people who are stakeholders.
Yeah.
Contacting them, making them aware of the events, inviting them, and give them a nudge to remind them.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Good one.
Maybe even just one stakeholder is already more than none, right? So just focus on one stakeholder and getting that person in. That's
one is more than none. I like it, Chris.
That's very deep.
And what else? Is there someone else that would like to share their next step? People are leaving. Am I too harsh, Chris? Or?
Okay, they have the limited time to use cameras. I'm observing it from the beginning of COVID on workshops. It looks like that in corporate trainings they have, one camera for 10 people and they're switching between them.
Yeah, so it's all gone quiet, so I'll just say something. I think the ability to train. So the company I've just started working with, we have a fantastic learning program for any spectrum, the developers, the coaches, the whole shebang. So that's something you don't need to ask permission for. You just go into the learning tool and you learn, and then you come back the next day or the next week and say, "Look what I just learned. Let's make things better." So I just think that's fantastic. It's the free learning opportunities. And even the paid one can go to one of your courses, right? There will be opportunities to do that with the liberators. It will make us better. And Arson and everyone else.
So I've just shared I'm just going to do some self-promotion, shameless self-promotion, but I think it's a relevant blog post. It's called Mind the Scrum Gap. And that's something that I see our Scrum community struggle with quite often, is that what we are very good at, and we as a community, is to talk about ideal Scrum. And in a way, it's something that Chris and I also do. Like in our book, the Zombie Scrum Survival Guide, we also talk about the two extremes. Like you've got the extreme of perfect Scrum, or healthy Scrum, and you've got the other extreme like Zombie Scrum. And what I've noticed is that a lot of teams can relate to that. Like, yeah, we recognize Zombie Scrum, and yep, we understand that what it actually should be like. But there's often a gap between, let's say, Zombie Scrum and perfect Scrum. And I think as a community, all of us, what we could do better is to help teams fill the gap. And one of those things that you can do is actually something that we are trying right now. Help the team with making the just small improvements, because that's also a way to continuously improve. If a team gets in this motion of continuously each sprint making small improvements, not necessarily resolving a huge impediment, but maybe just make a start that helps the team get in the direction of resolving impediments, that's also hugely motivating for a team. It probably gives team morale also a boost. So it's more like an encouragement, I hope, for all of us to just help teams, but in a way, refine their improvements. Because quite a lot of teams are aware of the importance of refining their work, in a way, let's say, things that are on the product backlog. But improvement refinement is often less common, is often less used. But I do think that refining your improvements might even also be a very essential skill that a team should have. So whenever you are in your next sprint retrospective, see if you can slice your improvements to smaller improvements. Just some thoughts. Chris, do you have anything smart to share at this point?
Well, nothing smart, but I want to +1 your comment, because that's, I think Barry and I are learning that's the most important thing of continuous improvement. You have to refine your improvements. And that's why I just emphasize the one stakeholder joining the sprint review. That's already a huge win. Then it's easier to get the second one in and the third one in, but just start with the first one. And don't start with all 5 or all 10 or just one. That's already different. Then the dynamic of the sprint review will already change.
Yeah, and may I add on top of this, so that when I'm working with clients, I'm trying to propose them to form hypotheses and not do a change, like, because people are scared about change and protecting themselves from change. We're discussing like what can potentially help us. Do we believe that this small step can change the dynamic a bit? Let's try it for 2-3 sprints. And then we will roll back everything back. So everything will be as it was before if it doesn't help us. And yeah, so we're creating some safety for them, some time frame and some measurements, which was agreed before we started. So it will be easier to like rely on and to make a conclusion. Was it a good idea or not? Not by the level of voice of people in the room, but by some concrete measurables. So
yeah, that's really good. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
So before we're gonna wrap up, any other questions that you have on top of mind, things we did not address and you really would like to have seen addressed?
Yeah, I was thinking about, sprint goal, because in the teams I work with, we have sprint goals, but they are not all the time. I mean, we can't really measure, but I mean, really measure if we achieved the sprint goal or not. And but okay, I would say work in progress. We are defining and started to define, in fact, sprint goals. So maybe this is first slice, and the next one would be to find also measurable or define some sprint goals that we can measure, really measure if we achieved or not. And I was thinking, because I have the feeling that the teams are not really aware of the sprint goal. I mean, they are aware in the sprint planning and maybe and then before sprint review, but during the sprint they are not so aware about the sprint goals. And I was thinking, and this is a change that maybe I can do starting with tomorrow, but I'm not sure if it's a good idea, whether I should ask them, in the daily meeting, which is our sprint goal. And I hesitated, I have this in mind for a few days, but I hesitated to do this because I want to avoid that Scrum police. And I'm thinking how I should do this in a manner in which they really understand what is my intention with this question. And maybe I should find my own answer with this. It's quite a rhetorical one, I would say.
No, yeah,
it's a lovely idea. I mean, it's a really good idea to reiterate the sprint goal during Scrum events. Daily Scrum is a really good example of this. So are there any suggestions from others? Like how could Madalena sort of avoid the danger of being a Scrum police?
With delegating generally the drive seat to the team members, so that you wouldn't be the one, but you would give up the sort of flag to carry on to other team members, and thus they are getting more engaged.
That's good. Yeah. So what could also work as a suggestion, something that I always like to do is or that we like to do is just observe, share an observation. Like, for example, in the previous daily scrums, I noticed that we are all just sharing tasks and I'm not sure what the connection between everything is. Maybe it's a good idea if we start by reiterating the sprint goal. Let's give it a try. What do you think? And connect our work to how that actually achieves the sprint goal or not. That could be a way too. Then you share the observation and ask the team if it's okay to do an experiment with it. And then, yeah, you're not really Scrum police. You're just a team member suggesting an idea.
Yeah, sounds good. A good idea. Thanks.
And I just gave, I think it was nice to also do a small gift because you had the courage to speak up. In the chat, you find a workshop template that says, help your team get started with a product and sprint goal. So Chris and I don't always give easy answers because there often are no easy answers, but we do like to create these do-it-yourself workshops. By now we've got about 100 in total. And if you run these type of workshops within your own team or your own organizations, chances are you will have a very good conversation in this example about product and sprint goals. And then you can figure out together with all your team members how you can best make use of sprint goals. So if you like, feel free to give it a try. Cool. I think we're going to wrap this one up. Andrei or Artem, any closing words from your side?
Well, from our side, thanks a lot, Christiaan and Barry, for a great workshop. And thanks a lot to our participants for being active, for willing to share, for the insight as well, for personal stories, for examples. We have to remind you that donations are still welcome. All of the links how you can donate are in the chat. And tomorrow we're going to have another open session. It's going to be an open discussion with Patricia Kang from Scrum.org and Ravi Verma, who is also a professional Scrum trainer at Scrum.org and also one of the co-organizers of this initiative. So it's going to be an open discussion. Everybody will be able to ask questions. So we don't have an agenda or anything prepared. It's just going to be a pure discussion with you guys focused on your questions about avoiding burnout and mental health, mental resilience in the workplace.
Sounds interesting.
Yep. So you're welcome to come tomorrow. And yeah, thanks a lot for being with us. It's a true pleasure.
From my side also. As I said, I was hunting for you for years. So finally I was present on your meetup and workshop. And for me, as a person who is currently in Ukraine, it's an opportunity to switch for 2 hours from what's going on and to be here with you and think about some more professional context, which is really helping. I believe that Alena can also support me about this because she's also in Ukraine. So thank you so much for your support and for your contribution. It was great. Yeah.
And thank you for making this possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're with you in our thoughts and in our actions. We will support you wherever we can.
And you are definitely on the top of the list of speakers who shared the most amount of links, articles, and merch.
Sorry for that.
Electronic merch.
We could have done way more.
Yeah, we can imagine. So we will invite you once again, maybe in a month or so.
Excellent. So good luck, everyone, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.